Though the world economy generally keeps on recovering, it still faces multiple risks and challenges, including a lack of growth momentum and consumption, turbulent financial markets, receding global trade and investment.
That was Chinese President Xi Jinping speaking at the G20 meeting in China last weekend. Welcome back. We're talking about the effort to strengthen relations between China and Canada. Let's get back to our panel. And Laura, listening to what President Xi Jinping had to say there, warning of a lack of growth and weak consumption as well as turbulence in financial markets, how vulnerable is Canada to these risks?
Canada is particularly vulnerable because it relies for so much of its GDP on external trade. It also has an aging population. A lot of baby boomers are retiring from the workforce. And so Canada really, really needs to engage with younger developing markets. And in many ways, China fills that criteria in a great way. But I think we're in an environment where everyone is sort of rolling up the welcome mat, where we've got Brexit, we've got trade protectionism. Here in this country, we have anti-NAFTA sentiment. We just can't afford to let these dominoes all fall. So I think that these closer engagement conversations between Canada and China are really very important at this period.
Sarah, let's take a listen to some of what Prime Minister Trudeau had to say about current international sentiment on the world economy.
The reality is there's a lot of people around the world who are worried that globalization, that trade, that economic growth hasn't been working for them. The middle class in a lot of countries like Canada and other Western countries has sort of flatlined, and there isn't a sense of growth there. So there's frustration. And when you get worried and frustrated, cynical politicians can try and exploit the fear and the anger, and then you get Brexit, and you get negative fears about the international community as a way of gaining power.
So, Sarah, we've also heard this from other leaders around the world. Is there a sense in Canada that the current system is not working for everybody, that it's only benefiting a few?
I think there's less a sense of that in Canada than there is in other parts of the world. However, there is a reticence in Canada about China and the role it plays. And part of this is a lack of understanding of what is happening with China. And I think this is exhibited in a recent poll that came out from the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, where when asked if a closer economic relationship with China was desirable, 50% of respondents said that they could probably be persuaded to support a closer economic relationship if more information were available. And so I think that opens the door. As Laura mentioned earlier, there's a fair amount of lack of support for something like a free trade agreement. But I think that if you ask Canadians about doing free trade agreements with almost any country, there's not a huge amount of support. And so we need to be able to demonstrate why, number one, what it means for the average Canadian. And Trudeau's trip was very much focused on how a relationship with China can benefit the middle class of Canada and grow the middle class of Canada. But also, any government needs to take leadership on this issue. As Prime Minister Trudeau said at a dinner he spoke at with our group last week, he said China matters, and it's irresponsible not to engage with China. It doesn't matter that we don't always agree and we don't always like what the other side is doing. Not engaging is really not an option, especially if Canada wants to preserve the prosperity that it currently maintains. And if it simply relies on the U.S. and other traditional markets for growth, that future prosperity is very much in question.
Jia Wang, last Thursday in Shanghai, Prime Minister Trudeau announced the 56 trade deals with China, totaling something like $915 billion. And that announcement included seafood, clean technologies, health sciences, and agriculture, as well as major investments of up to $508 million in Chinese investment. How important are these kinds of deals in what the Prime Minister himself has called resetting the relationship with China?
These type of deals are very important, and they're a good indicator that the two countries are working closer again together to hopefully achieve economic prosperity for both countries. And again, the world is changing, and Canada and China are both part of it. So the engagement between the two countries are very important. And China now not only provides a large market for Canadian exports, especially the premium products and products that are attractive to to Chinese middle class and upper middle class consumers, but China has also become a source of innovation and new technology, but also a source country that would provide a large sum of capital into other countries, including into developed countries like Canada. And Canada, when it comes to resource sectors and some other sectors, that it requires a lot of capital that Canada currently just doesn't have. So the collaboration and also recognizing China has become a country that has capital and also a huge market for Canadian goods. These are very important. I think the trade deals is a very good start to help reset this relationship.
Right, Tian, you talked earlier on about Justin Trudeau's earlier visits to Canada, first with his father, who was then Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, and of course afterwards he, as you pointed out, backpacked through China. Do you think that these trips as a private citizen, so to speak, shaped his view on China?
Certainly, it seems that the Prime Minister Trudeau, at this age, seem to have a bigger or better understanding than many of the other state leaders that I've been talking to when it comes to real pictures and real lives of the real Chinese people. He was specifically mentioned about his backpacking trip, the third time he made it to China. And he talked about during the Spring Festival, which is, of course, the traditional Chinese festival, the New Year, that at the train station, how crowded it was and how Chinese were celebrating those festivals. Only a glimpse into the Chinese traditional life, but certainly those Youth-day pictures could help him a lot in understanding the mentalities behind many of the choices that Chinese are making these days. I want to emphasize that the recognition of Canada about China's position today did not start this year, but rather back in 1999. After all, Canada was one member of the G7 that worked with the emerging economies to create the G20 platform. And also this time, when you see that TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade deal that U.S. initiated, not necessarily going to go through quickly, at least for now, because of political difficulties back in Washington, it seems to be a warning sign to Canada that it has to step out of this comfort zone to approach other markets. And of course, the Chinese market is one of the things to do. Having said that, though, there's also another very important thing, that every economy among the G20 economies, they're trying to restructure their economies. So how to do that? Everybody has their own remedies. And it seems to Prime Minister Trudeau, this trade with China, further link with China, is one of the critical steps. I was very much touched, if I could just add this, a picture, that he was holding his little daughter, 7 years old, in his arms when he and the Chinese Prime Minister walked out of the Great Hall of the People after their state banquet. And that picture showed to many Chinese around this country. They were very much touched by that, because it really, in a way, indicates the next generation of the people from both sides are likely to work together and understanding each other much better.
So, Laura, when we look at that, what Tian was talking about, I guess what we call the optics of a state visit like Justin Trudeau's to Canada, did you get the sense that this is indeed the beginning of a new era in the relationship, as Justin Trudeau put it himself?
I don't think that the visit could have gone better. I think all of the pieces fell in place. I think Justin Trudeau is a very, very skilled statesman, young in office, but a lifetime of experience in doing diplomacy. At the same time, back in Canada, folks are looking at closer engagement and saying, is a trade agreement just a trade agreement? If we were to engage in a continuing free trade agreement with China, does this mean that we are giving tacit approval to everything else that China is doing? Is it giving the green light to China on everything, or will we be able to continue to engage on issues of concern? And I think, in my opinion, this brings Canada to the table to talk to China more as a partner, rather than on the outside of the house throwing stones against the wall.
All right, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.